Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. For those that didn't attend my my session earlier today, I'm Nick Hayes. I'm an analyst covering governance, risk, and compliance for Forrester Research. Really excited to be here today. I think we're talking about GRC at an incredibly interesting time. Let's see, does this work? Okay, it works. We're talking about GRC at an incredibly interesting time where it's only getting more important. Our risk environments are getting more volatile, and we have to figure out ways to actually help our organizations deal with that from a strategic perspective. Actually, the last time I was in London, it was right after the Brexit vote, and there were all sorts of questions that we were fielding as participating in a panel, fielding around how organizations weren't prepared, weren't ready, weren't thinking about it from a risk management perspective and how they could actually do that more effectively this time around. Now, on Tuesday, we face a very similar situation in the US where, depending on the outcome of the election, the presidential election on Tuesday, there could be just the same type of issues where organizations may not have understood the different types of risk implications for each of their organizations. So, we're at an incredibly interesting time about talking about GRC where it's actually even more important to the business. And so my role here today is I'm going to be participating in this panel, but I just wanted to give kind of a brief overview for everyone that's still here and made it through a very long day. The one thing that Forrester really focuses on today is the topic of the age of the customer. How all of this digital disruption, all of this digital transformation is changing our business environments and changing the power of institutions and transforming it and shifting it to the customer. Customers now have mobile devices. They're experiencing your products and services through digital technology, which is changing the way that organizations are winning, serving, and retaining customers. And in addition, it provides them abilities that they didn't have before. They have more access to information. They have an easier ability to switch and move to a competitor. So all of these things combined are changing the way that we have to think about customer experience, how we think about risks, customer-facing risks, brand, reputation. All of that is more integral to corporate performance and therefore more integral to risk management. So when we're talking about the age of the customer, we also have to focus on that customer-obsessed aspect of it. So what I want to do is hopefully click next, is talk about how in this age of the customer, digital risks are top concerns for business decision makers today. When we ask the question, how critical are each of the following risk concerns for your organization today? We asked business and technology leaders worldwide this question. And we were able to bucket the groups by those that are customer obsessed, those that are actually prioritizing and believe that investing in customer experience and addressing rising customer expectations is a critical business strategic priority versus the rest. So when we look at customer-obsessed organizations versus others that aren't necessarily thinking about customer experience or thinking about addressing customer expectations as highly as others, you notice that there's a huge difference in their risk concerns. Overall, every single risk type, customer-obsessed organizations are more concerned about. But what's really interesting are the gaps. When you start to really drill in and you start to look at where customer-obsessed organizations are, they're in these digital risk areas, these intangible areas of information security and privacy risk, technology risk, reputational risk. All these issues that we know and think about, but you don't necessarily or aren't able to quantify in the same ways that you're able to quantify different parts of your business, your physical assets, your cash on hand, your property. Because of that, we have a changing role that GRC has to play in terms of how we actually manage and mitigate these digital risks. So one point that I wanted to highlight around this is just one forecast from our marketing team that's showing how digital brand assets are actually more valuable than ever. By 2019, digital marketing spend will surpass the amount of marketing spend that they put into television. So this is showing that just in social media advertising, different advertisements on Google, on other websites, all of that is going to surpass the amount of money that they put into TV. That is a huge shift, and these are just the direct actual investments into digital marketing. It's not actually thinking about the overall worth of those assets, of your intellectual property. If something goes wrong with your organization and your reputation is damaged, how it actually affects every other part of your organization and every other asset that you own. So as this trend continues, and it will continue as technology continues to disrupt organizations, how do we translate that into risk? So earlier today in my presentation, I talked about how the S&P 500 back in 1975, its net worth was comprised of 17% in intangible assets. Things like I just mentioned, customer experience, reputation, intellectual property, know-how, things that you can't put or we don't have a good, consistent accounting practice for. That number rose dramatically to today, where it's over 88% of the S&P 500. So from this perspective, we have to start thinking about how do we actually protect these intangible risks, how do we protect these intangible assets? And part of it is by valuing them correctly, part of it is by applying risk methodologies that actually consider a number of these issues. And I hope that during the panel we'll actually be able to go into this in more detail. We still have a long way to go though. A lot of organizations are still trying to build formal risk management programs. During one of our studies, we found that only 40% of organizations have a formal risk management program with a chief risk officer or equivalent. And when you drill into that 40%, the maturity of those formal risk management programs are all over the map. So a lot of organizations are still immature, uncoordinated, and need a lot of work in terms of improving to help think through how we address big data and analytics, how we think through risk management consistently across the organization today. And so holistic coordinated coverage is really essential. Another question we ask is, which of the following areas of risk is your program fully or mostly responsible? So when we look at those mature organizations, what we find is that they are actually covering risk much more holistically. They're not just focused in one silo of third-party risk or operational risk or compliance. They're thinking about risk management from a broad perspective, working with a number of different departments from compliance, HR, internal audit, risk management, information security, IT, all of them play a role. So we have to start thinking about how we coordinate all of that through technology, using GRC as this fundamental coordinated approach to very large strategic issues that could make or break our companies today. So I want to leave some final thoughts before we bring on our panel. And again, as we get into the panel, hopefully we can make this an interactive discussion. Hopefully we can dive into some of the more details of this. So these are just some food for thought that then will hopefully spur some of the conversation as we go forward. First, I believe that risks cascade and interconnect more than they ever have before. When something goes wrong with your organization, it has implications across the board. If you have a supply chain issue, it then is an issue for your reputation. It's an issue with meeting your financial obligations. It could be an issue from a regulatory standpoint. That's just one example. Secondly, we have to align GRC to our core brand values. When we start talking about brand and reputation, all of a sudden it gets into this very messy, inconclusive area of what that actually means. But we have to start thinking about, okay, our brand purpose or our company's brand purpose is X. What are the risks related to that? CVS, I mentioned this in my session earlier today. CVS actually did a great job of this 2 years ago. They decided to stop selling tobacco products in their stores because they realized how big of an issue it was in terms of the dissonance that they were creating between the customers going into a store and being able to buy tobacco products and nicotine patches at the same time. So they aligned and thought through. They aligned to that core strategy, removing a $2 billion annual business for the company, all because they realized that their brand was more important. Corporate reputation and compliance culture are intrinsically tied together. We see this time and time again. Whenever there's a major corporate scandal, a major issue, whether it's at GM and its ignition switch defect, Volkswagen, Wells Fargo now, all of them have corporate culture, talk about corporate culture, which then translates and ultimately results in a diminished reputation. Fourthly, better GRC data and analytics is going to help us see the forest through the trees. We may not be there yet. We may not actually be able to leverage the best data, be able to use predictive analytics right now, but we will be able to soon. Some organizations are already there. We have to start thinking about that and prioritizing how we build better strategic data. Finally, think big, have these really good, awesome ideas. Be visionary in the way that you think about GRC. I can't stress this enough. We are here today all amongst colleagues that get to focus on risk and compliance, which normally outside of this group, eyes start glazing over. But if we phrase it and start telling the right stories around GRC, we can bring it alive and we can show how it can really be a strategic enabler for the organization. But in order to do that, we can set that vision, but we have to start with where we are today. Be realistic about where your organization is and how you're going to get to that vision for your organization. So those are my final thoughts before I welcome the stage, the rest of the panel. So thank you.